Good evening. I'm Eve Vogelstein, President of Great Talk. And on behalf of our Executive Director, Claudine Davison, our Vice President, Diane Davison, and our board, we welcome you. All of us in person and online can enjoy this thought-provoking and educational program thanks to the generous support and donations of so many. Thank you to Goucher College and President Ken Devereaux for opening the Athenaeum Hall for this conversation about space invaders. I would like to thank our longtime Great Talk Gold sponsors, the Zaf McKinney Group at Morgan Stanley and LifeBridge Health. And we greatly appreciate their support. And thank you to our media co-sponsors, WYPR, the Baltimore Fishbowl, and the Baltimore Sun. Those of you who donated to tonight's program, we thank you greatly. And if you would like us to continue to offer these great talks for free, you could donate to us at greattalk.org. Everyone on our email list will be notified when the recording of tonight's talk is posted on YouTube, as well as updates about our future Great Talk events. Following the panel discussion, we will have a Q&A. I'm now delighted to introduce our moderator, Dr. Peter Hayes. Dr. Hayes is a professional lecturer of space policy and international affairs at George Washington University's Space Policy Institute, space chair at Marine Corps University, and is senior policy advisor with Falcon Research. He is a fellow at the Prague Security Studies Institute, space advisor for the Non-Proliferation Policy Education Center, and non-resident senior affiliate with the Aerospace Security and Missile Defense Projects at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. That's great. Thank you. Thank you for being with us tonight. And I'd like Dr. Hayes will come up and introduce our panelists.
Well, good evening. It's really great to be with you all. As you've heard, we've got some great panelists, and I think we have a fascinating topic because it's absolutely having everything to do with humanity's future. So how humanity ventures into space, how we set the rules for doing that, and maybe make some money as we do all that, those are going to be really critical issues for the future of humanity. So I'm going to depart from the long introduction that was given to me, and I will just point you to your program because each of the panelists who have a very distinguished background has a short bio and then also a link to their entire bio if you want to learn some more things about them. So I'm going to just do it in a couple of sentences here. To my immediate left is Amber McIntyre. Amber is Senior Director of Civil Space at the Aerospace Industries Association, and that means she focuses on the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, and she is certainly an expert in those areas. Next to her is KATHERINE Melbourne, who is a National Security Space Policy Analyst at the Aerospace Corporation's Center for Space and, let me get this straight, Center for Space Strategy and Policy and Strategy. Okay, sorry. Policy comes before strategy. I have to learn that. Okay, and for those of you who might be aware, I mean, Aerospace Corporation is one of the leading federally funded research and development centers dealing with space issues. So she's at kind of the belly of the beast on those kinds of issues. Next to her is a space lawyer extraordinaire, Dr. David KOPLOW, Esquire. Is professor of space law at Georgetown University, and he is truly one of the leading space lawyers in the world. And finally, our last panelist is Michael DYMENT, and he is the founding and partner for Nexa Capital Financial Advisors. He's the panelist that's going to tell us how we can all make a large fortune in space. That reminds me of a joke. Do you know the best way to make a small fortune in space? Start with a large fortune, that's right. But Michael knows the ways to actually grow your money in space. So that's our introduction. Again, if you want to know anything more about our panelists, please do look them up. I'm going to switch over to this now. All right, so I thought one of the best ways to start out would be to ask each of the panelists what they see as the largest opportunities in space for the near term, as well as some of the greatest impediments. And I think that will be a great way to kind of get into some of the many issues involved in space policy right now. So if you wouldn't mind, Amber, you could start out.
And thank you guys for having us, and I hope tonight's conversation is as fun for you guys as it will be for the space geeks here. But I think I like to think of the opportunities in two ways, and I know we'll talk a lot a bit about the economic opportunities, but I work for a lobbying and trade association that gets to represent over 300 aerospace and defense companies. About 60 of those companies are space companies, and they are all looking to both be, profitable and revenue generating while also supporting our nation's most critical space ambitions. And so I think there are so many economic opportunities that stand before us as it relates to the space industry, whether it's telecom, which we see blowing up crazy, LEO broadband with Amazon LEO and Starlink, whether it's other uses of LEO with commercial space stations that we hope to see come on board, or whether it's all of the work that has to happen across the space industrial base for us to realize our ambitions on the moon. There's a lot of money that the Hill at least wants to pour both into national security space, but also into civil space, so that agencies like NASA and NOAA have the money they need to support industry in getting the right products and capabilities. So there's a huge economic opportunity before us as we realize the U.S.'s space ambitions that are only going to be successful if industry and space businesses are successful and able to thrive. And then I think the second opportunity and challenge is the space diplomacy. I had the opportunity of working at the UN under Ambassador Thomas Greenfield when Russia invaded Ukraine. And so happened Bill Nelson, who was the head of NASA, their old friends, he comes over to the ambassador's residence and says, hey, a lot is going on with Russia. How can I help? What can we do? She's asking him, how are relations on a space station given conflicts on Earth? And, they both said, if it weren't for that ISS relationship with the Russians, we wouldn't really even be talking to the Russians right now. And so I think space just has this great power of bringing people together and supporting humanity's interests. But even when things on the ground aren't going well, you still see very strong space partnerships diplomatically. So I think the challenge is that when relationships break down and multilateral and bilateral partnerships break down, we worry that will have an impact on our space ambitions, which, should not ebb and flow. These are long horizon missions, and so relationships need to be as enduring as those missions.
All right, thank you. I think that was a great way to start it off. Space diplomacy holds a special place in my heart because this is the reason I got into space policy as a field. I saw, as an astronomy major, I saw how valuable it was to have people on the backside working on all the agreements that actually make these missions possible. So when it comes to opportunities, though, I am going to pay homage to that background in science and say I'm really excited about deep space exploration and all the opportunities we have to do some really cool science in space, especially autonomy and the way that will enable some of these deep space exploration missions. With that, we will be able to do operations on other planets, the surface of other moons around other planets, even in communications limited environments, and there's just huge opportunity for that. I've seen it already happen working on the James Webb Space Telescope at my previous organization, and just how powerful that has been and how uniting it's been as well to see the science that's come out of that. I do think a big challenge is going to be as we get more and more actors in space, handling space traffic management is going to be
How
a big issue. Space debris eventually is also, I'm sure we'll get into it. It's part of the name of the talk. But that's going to be a big concern, especially, again, the other flip side of autonomy is when a lot of these large constellations of satellites are acting more autonomously. That can create a challenge for traffic management in space. So a lot of opportunities and challenges, but excited to learn more about them all.
So I think my role, at least for this first question, is to be the Grinch, the skunk at the picnic, and talk much more about the problems and the impediments rather than the opportunities and the exciting joys of outer space. And if there is a joy, if there is an opportunity, I see it as mostly being an opportunity to get it right this time and to correct so many of the things that humanity has done badly in outer space in the past several decades. And I'll just tick off a few of these, and maybe this becomes an agenda of things we might want to talk about in more depth as the evening goes on. One of them, surely, already been mentioned, is the problem of congestion in outer space. There's so many more satellites, and especially in particularly popular and useful orbits, the dangers of congestion leading to debris are immense, and the world just does not have a suitable mechanism for space traffic management or for removal of some of that debris from outer space, and we've got to do better on that. Another one is the security aspects, national security, military security. The danger of anti-satellite weapons development, testing, and use. The world does not have a legal mechanism for restricting that kind of dangerous activity in outer space. The United States and others have been doing it for years, probably going to continue doing it, and this is an opportunity for us to get that right. Another aspect of the congestion in outer space, this point is a little bit more obscure, is the degree to which the dense network of satellites, especially in low Earth orbit, impedes astronomy. Ground-based telescopes have a very hard time seeing past the clusters of satellites that are whizzing through their field of view and obscuring the images that they want to collect of distant space. There is no good mechanism for resolving that kind of problem. Yet another problem we haven't dealt with is the danger of incoming asteroids. You may know that there's millions of asteroids out there. It's been in the news just this past week when a meteorite fell to Earth, one over Ohio, another one over Texas, and the world does not have a capability for dealing with the danger of much larger asteroids, the kind of thing that 60 million years ago killed all the dinosaurs, and we don't have much capability beyond what the dinosaurs had to resist that kind of intrusion. So that's another opportunity for the world to do something about that and to get right some of the problems that we haven't dealt with effectively in the past.
How to top that. My name is Michael Diamond. I'm with Nexa Capital Partners. We are an investment bank, very active in aerospace as well as space. And I'd like to, as an engineer, I'm a dreamer like a lot of us. It's so exciting to see all the innovation that's going on in space or in preparation for space launch programs, etc. The pace of innovation is staggering, and the number of opportunities that we find interesting that need capital occupy us daily and sometimes hourly. It's truly amazing. Having said that, the market studies have shown that the value of the space sector, space industry, call it what you want, runs around $2 trillion over the next 10 to 15 years. It's a very speculative number, but in fact, it's there. And the question is, who's paying for it? What's the business case for investors trying to support the vision and the opportunities that space creates for us all? And it's a very competitive environment. I mean, in the United States, we have a specific discipline and focus on certain things with a heavy emphasis on dual-use technologies like GPS or other military, civil dual-use programs and the like. But it's very challenging, and we need to have the U.S., the federal government, as a strong partner in partnerships are everything in space launch programs and investments. We can't these days rely on the federal government to carry through with its commitments and promises. So it makes it difficult for us as investors to make our bets without having that public-private partnership anchor that the federal government used to provide, pretends to provide, but there has to be more reliability that goes back into it. I guess we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. That's a great way to introduce a wide range of topics, and I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to get into many of those. I'm actually feeling quite Grinch-like as well. So I do think it would be more helpful if we went into some of those of the largest things that we see as threats or impediments. And David, I was a little bit surprised that you left out one of my favorites, which is a severe geomagnetic storm. So this, in my opinion, is something that too many people around the world aren't even aware of. The last time the world was subjected to one of those, it's known as the Carrington event, after the Royal Astronomer, and it happened in 1859. And that was before we had a lot of electricity. We only had telegraphs and things, but the flux from the sun was so great that people could go out and read the newspaper at 2 o'clock in the morning at the equator. Normally, all those charged particles come in to the North and South Pole, but the radiation was so intense it was just bombarding Earth everywhere. Lloyd's of London did an estimate that a similar event, similar magnitude event today would be a $2.7 trillion event. And they said it would take months to years, if ever, if the world could recover from that. So, we kind of live in a dangerous neighborhood. It doesn't happen all the time. But when people, scientists go up to the North and South Pole and do ice core samples, they find about every 200 years there's a layer of very highly charged particles. So we've probably missed one of those things by a couple of days, a couple of times along the way. So in keeping with that, what I'd really like to try and do is ask each of you what you see as the most promising, either political, technical, social ways that we might be able to address some of those greatest challenges. And I guess I'll answer my own question on the first one. The good news is that you can make things significantly harder with respect to electrical grids on Earth. You can basically just have a big off switch, and you also need a way to know that these events are coming. So we have some satellites that are purpose for that today, but we probably need a few more of them so that we can characterize them in greater detail and provide more warning to everybody on Earth, because that's truly going to be a space catastrophic event. So maybe we could go to asteroids, near-Earth objects, or any of the other things, congestion, spectrum. It's up to you guys. I know you know everything.
Yeah, I'll start with the orbital debris conversation. I think what has been most promising over the last couple of years is a recognition among the interagencies, so all of the federal agencies that have equities in space, whether it's NASA as an operator, or NOAA as an operator, whether it's FAA as a regulator of launch and reentry, whether it's FCC as spectrum allocator, they've all recognized the significant threat that orbital debris creates. And so through series of strategies and talks and a lot of thinking from a lot of smart people, it was determined that, you know, first of all, the way to avoid a collision is to first know who's moving where. And there has not been a very good, comprehensive space situational awareness system that is accessible to companies and to the civil community. The way that we have understood where objects are in LEO have largely been because of the Pentagon and the work that's being done on on space domain awareness, which is what the scary NatSec people call it. And so there was a recognition that, hey, with the growth of the industry, with all of this propagation of LEO, we need a federal system that helps us track objects in LEO, whether they are active or whether they are debris, and be able to do that traffic coordination so that we can avoid Kessler effect, which is the irreversible domino effect of debris just creating more debris. And so for the last few years, we saw the U.S. Department of Commerce take the lead on a program called TRACS, which would be a public platform that a company, any company around the world could go in and get a baseline set of data to help them understand where satellites are operating in space. Their own satellites and others, right? The thinking is that the more you know, the better you can plan and the better you can coordinate. That is a $60 million effort that had bipartisan support on the Hill and was something that the Department of Commerce has been working for years on. To only come up against a lot of issues last year with the president's budget and the ability to fund that. And so where, it was just mentioned sort of in space, the best thing that the government can do is provide stable, predictable mission plans, stable, predictable budgets. These are long horizon, very costly things. And so the U.S. is saying we want to see our space industry succeed. We want to create the traffic lights, if you will, for the roads of space, but not funding it properly, not giving the resources to these offices. So what you end up having is Department of Defense continuing to run what is really a military platform and really not available to the public, but also not accessible to industry. And, the conversation has gone from the U.S. recognizes our role in safety and sustainability. We want to provide this public service to the world. The same way NASA provides science and data to the world for free, this was a similar public service. And so now the conversation has gone from, okay, this is something that the government owns and is responsible for to, well, can industry just do this for themselves? And it was so promising, and it still is, and folks like me and others are advocating on the Hill and talking to the administration and stressing the importance of protecting LEO and sustaining LEO for us all. And so it's programs like that, a recognition that while industry has a huge role to play, some things are the job of government and some things are the job of industry. And so one of the challenges is that when you don't have predictable budgets, when you fund something in one administration and then decide to not fund it in the next administration, you create incredible delays and you miss the opportunity of promoting safety. And what you also do is seed that type of leadership to others. So whereas our industry was looking forward to TRACS because they wanted this resource, if this resource or this program doesn't move forward, then maybe they have to now rely on the EU space tracking system, which we love the EU with their allies, and they're happy to share that data. But that's one way where we're stepping back on our leadership as a country.
Can I just add a couple of points on this to pick up on what you were talking about? Here's some data. There are about 14,000 active satellites now orbiting the Earth in various configurations. Many of them are low Earth orbit. The SpaceX Starlink program is 10,000 of those. That gives you some idea. 10,000 of those. Some idea. There are over 1.2 million space debris particles that we know about that are of a size of about between 1 centimeter and 10 centimeters. Very difficult to see and to track. And they're moving at 10 kilometers a minute, or is it a second? Thank you. So these are like faster than bullets, right? And the ISS gets hit with these things all the time. I think about 10 years ago, an Iridium satellite collided with a Russian satellite that was not operating. I think that was the story. And spread debris all throughout space. It's a big challenge. And I think if there's one or two more of these events, it's going to be very difficult to do anything in space. So this is an issue of crisis proportion, and the world needs to really focus on that. The asteroid's great. I'm in full agreement. I watch all the movies that everybody else does it. But space debris could bring us very unhappy times.
Would David or Catherine like to weigh in on that?
Yes, I do, especially from the national security perspective. I talk a lot in my role about security, and one of the ways that people have proposed we could keep some of our assets in space safer is maneuvering them. And so now we're talking about space traffic management and tracking everything in space. Well, secrecy is valued for security purposes, and there's been proposals to, maneuver satellites so that we lose track of where they are to keep them safe. But that can also be a big, big challenge when it comes to the overall security of the environment and stability in the environment. So it's just something to consider from the national security perspective. So it makes tools like this. Oh, sorry, thank you. It makes tools like this so much more important to make sure that they are fully robust so that we understand what's happening in the space environment, both for security purposes and for safety purposes.
Pete, as a perpetual optimist, you have directed us to try to say something about the part of the glass that is half full. And as I indicated earlier, I'm not very good at that. I'm much more focused on the problems and the dangers, and I like to whine and complain. But here's at least one small positive note on the planetary defense, the anti-asteroid business, where at least we've got the beginnings of a structure for international cooperation to try to identify the possible dangers and to construct a system for doing something in response. And NASA and the companion space agencies from around the world have created a couple of institutions that are taking small steps in a positive direction. One of those is called the International Asteroid Warning Network, and it's a collection of astronomers from around the world who are devoted to trying to see where the asteroids are and to detect in advance which of them might pose a threat to the Earth. It's a difficult, challenging mission, and they are making some progress. The other organization is called the Space Mission Planning Advisory Group. And I should also just note, as a side point, the initials for that, and everybody only does initials, Space Mission Planning Advisory Group is SMPAG. And you pronounce that as same page, because it's the effort to get the countries on the same page when it comes to doing something about asteroids. And same page has undertaken studies to try to get countries to coordinate their activities in developing mechanisms for doing something effective about the danger of an incoming asteroid. And you may remember that 2 or 3 years ago, NASA undertook the first actual test of an anti-asteroid system. It was called the DART mission. And DART consisted of a small spacecraft that was deployed to crash into an asteroid and determine whether by doing that you could alter the trajectory of the asteroid even just a little bit. And the mission was a phenomenal success, not only in accomplishing the task of finding and autonomously directing the spacecraft to collide with the asteroid, but also in showing that you could measurably alter the asteroid's trajectory so that as a first test, this would work only against a relatively small asteroid and only when you had a relatively large warning time before it might impact the Earth. But at least it's a step forward. And therefore, even as a Grinch, I want to applaud that.
Well, thanks. We appreciate that. Speaking for who's everywhere. I did want to also mention an area that might be a little bit of a glass full when it comes to debris. Because in the last administration, the United States pledged that it would no longer conduct destructive anti-satellite tests. And anti-satellite weapons being tested are the single largest cause of debris. So it would be very significant if all the actors in the world pledged to do something similar to that. And the good news, again, with respect to that is I think it's up to about 40 countries that have made a similar unilateral pledge, and then there was a UN General Assembly resolution that 155 states supported. Now, the bad news in that regard is every other state that's conducted a destructive anti-satellite test did not agree with that General Assembly resolution. So Russia, China, and India, well, Russia and China voted no, India abstained. So anyways, we have miles to go on that, I think, still, but a little bit of progress, I guess. So I'm just wondering if the panel might have some other specific things. I mean, it seems to me that our ability to know what's in space is improving pretty radically. Are there some technologies around the corner that might provide ways of cleaning this up in a cost-effective manner that you see on the horizon, or are we really going to be reliant on Bruce Willis? And I don't know. I don't think he's up for the job anymore.
I'll start, and I think Catherine might. There are a lot of cool technologies. There are a lot of companies, some of the ones that we represent, that are focusing on rendezvous and proximity operations, that are focusing on this maneuverability in space for positive reasons, right? To be able to refuel a satellite, to be able to go and fix a part using a robotic arm on a satellite that's been broken, using it to, just get closer to a satellite that you might want to take pictures of or inspect and things like that. So that technology is developing. NASA has had a huge role in R&D for companies like Astroscale that are looking to, actually refuel satellites in space, which extends their mission life, which adds so much cost benefit over time, which, as a side note, there's also a whole effort to do reusable, replaceable small sats as well. So it's economy's growing in both ways, but that technology is there, it's being tested, it's real. The issue is who's really truly invested in it and to what end. So I think people like the Defense Innovation Unit and folks at like the Space Development Agency has long recognized that at some point DoD is going to want to do in-space maneuverability, and they're going to need industry to bring that innovation to bear. And it takes a lot of time because space is hard, but we do see those technologies being developed. Similarly, we're going to want to have the capability to do in-space resource utilization, right? So when we do get these moon bases, we want to be able to mine the moon and understand the value of those materials and be able to bring them back to Earth, and all of that requires new capabilities that we never had before. And so much of when people talk about space innovation for new space, they talk about the technologies, capabilities, and products that are going to keep us in space long term, and they're going to provide the best opportunity for humans to actually survive in space while making companies money, while being safe and sustainable. and also following just these very stringent policy and regulatory regimes that we have on Earth as well. So it's a very promising, like when you talk about new space, a lot of what you're talking about is all the things that we're going to need to really push humanity to be a multi-planetary species. And there are companies, new and old, working on this stuff, because I mentioned Astroscale, which is one of my favorite new space companies, but Northrop Grumman is also working on how do you build, manufacture, refuel, fix, repair in space, which over the long run would be much cheaper for everyone than having to launch, deorbit, fix it on Earth, relaunch, all the cost that comes with that.
I just follow up with that as well. There's a company that I'm on the panel because I think people want to figure out if you can make money at this stuff, right? So we just looked at a business plan that came out of a group of NASA engineers who proposed to send into space a grinder that will go to the ISS. Instead of dumping the ISS in the Pacific Ocean, which has like 30 tons of high-grade aluminum, the idea is to grind the ISS up into beads and recycle, this is all sustainability stuff, recycle all that aluminum in space, because every ton that was launched was a couple of $1 billion, so you just do the math, In any event, although it's a really crazy idea that has a lot of promise and it attracts money potentially, NASA finds it easier just to put the ISS into the ocean and be done with it. So things like this, there's an intersection between policy and industry that doesn't always work effectively and efficiently, and I know that there are a lot of really smart people in government who are trying to fix that, and that's key.
It is key because, $613 billion economy for space, right? About 80% of that is coming from government customers. The commercial space industry is not quite commercial. If NASA and Space Force decided tomorrow that they were going to sunset all of their space programs, there would be no U.S. space industry. Because companies would not be able to survive just doing B2B sales, because space is too expensive. And I keep saying this, the horizons are too long for any one company, any one group of companies to do it. They don't even necessarily have the national imperative to be responsible for humanity's uncovering of the questions of the universe, right? So all to say that we're working toward a space ecosystem that is more balanced, where you don't have to have a NASA or DoD contract to be a viable space company, where you can really just survive off of your commercial clients. I don't know any company that's actually doing that, but ideally we want to get to that point. And I think stable budgets, strong mission plans from NASA and NOAA, Space Force knowing clearly the capabilities that they need today, tomorrow, and in 20 years is what is going to be the make or break for a space industry in like the next, because I hear that $2 trillion number a lot, but so much depends on getting policy right, regulatory right, for us to get there.
I was just going to talk about regulatory clarity a little bit too, because I do think that as we get a lot of these new capabilities online, commercial should have the chance to innovate and should have a chance to be creative, but I do think that there is a role for the government to lead the way when it says there comes to ambiguities on how to implement certain things in space, like rendezvous and proximity operations. There's a lot of regulatory ambiguity around that, for example, and that's just becoming more and more common. It's also challenging to think about, like, there's current missions that do things like near Earth imaging, and that is there's been a lot of regulatory development on that to allow people to have more flexibility with their capabilities, but then there's still restrictions that people are facing when they're trying to say, get a camera that's used for RPOs, which when I say RPOs, I mean rendezvous and proximity operations. So when two satellites are moving close together, there's probably a camera being used to say, okay, here's how close I am to this other satellite. That's not actually taking any imagery of the Earth. And whenever we take imagery of the Earth, that is something that is licensed. And companies sometimes face roadblocks on the regulatory front where they have to get these imaging systems licensed. So there's definitely a push and pull between commercial and government, and how do you regulate certain things. But when it comes to new capabilities, I think the government does have an opportunity to lead the way. And when you have a bunch of commercial systems working towards a common goal, saying putting down lunar infrastructure, it really helps to have the government as not a master planner, but to have a system where people can, input, this is what our plans are, and then see how their plans interact with another commercial operator's plans, and that sort of thing. So digital engineering environment. And so I think it's important we think about the role of government in those kinds of questions.
I will respond, and then I'll kind of stop talking for a second. But just today, I was at the SAT show, one of the largest satellite industry conferences in the world. It's happening in DC this week. I moderated a fireside with the head of the Office of Space Commerce about a proposal that they put on their website today that is talking about how the government is getting licenses for these brand new things in space that have never been done before, more streamlined and more efficient. So think about this. If you have a satellite that you want to send into space, depending on what it does, you need 4 or 5 different federal agencies to give you a license. If you're using Spectrum, you got to go to the FAA. If you're putting your payload on a rocket, which you will be doing, FAA has to review and license that launch and that payload. If it's commercial remote sensing, if it's Earth imaging, the Department of Commerce has to say, okay, we'll allow it. And so companies have been experiencing a lot of heartburn when it comes to where do we even go to get a license to refuel a satellite in GEO, because it's never been done. And so just now we reached a really important milestone, and this was something I worked on when I was in the government, to say finally a new space company can go to the Office of Commerce and say, hey, we want to put a commercial space station in LEO and get a commercial space certification that says, hey, the government has signed off on your ability to do this work. You have met the requirements for orbital debris mitigation, which is a huge thing. Companies have to agree and commit to doing as little harm as they can possibly do to protect the space environment, that you're not going to interfere with someone's spectrum, right? You're going to do what ITU says and stay in your bands, and you're not going to harm the public. Right, you're not going to have a blast radius that's reaching people home, or you're not going to have parts of your rocket falling out in back of parks. And so I think from a glass half full perspective, finally we're seeing the U.S. actually put pen to paper to say, hey, we know that companies can't grow and they can't scale when they don't know what the government expects of them, when they don't know what their requirements will be, or when they have to literally do hundreds of pages of applications every time they want to even change a screw on an already existing satellite. So my job is to advocate for an industry and make it as easy as it can be for a company to be as successful as their innovation and as their ideas will allow them to be. And so much of that is getting the regulations right. And it's also important because the rest of the world is looking at us and what we do. We take these lessons learned to UN COPLOW, we take them to ITU, we take them to the Artemis Accords even, which leads me to my second point about lunar cooperation. I'm kind of excited about NASA's pivot on the moon base because it now gives these Accord signatories something to actually work toward. It gives them the opportunity to say, listen, if I'm Nigeria, if I'm Peru, I'm not going to have astronauts on the moon in the next decade. But that doesn't mean I won't have them there in the next 50 years. And I still want to be able to do the science that is important to my nation. I still want to be able to access the South Pole, which is where we believe the resources might be. So all of that coordination and cooperation has to happen early, and the world has to be somewhat aligned when it comes to regulation because, American companies are launching from foreign soil. Foreign companies want to launch from U.S. soil. Space doesn't have borders, all these other things. So it's going to be not just important that we get it right because we care, but we're still the U.S. We are still the greatest space nation in the world, and what we do, the rest of the world follows.
Yeah, for context, just a couple of points. The first is that if there's a movie that features Bruce Willis, whether it's about outer space or anything else, if it features Bruce Willis, it's probably not a documentary. And therefore you can't rely on it for authoritative scientific guidance on how the mission should proceed. In almost all the anti-asteroid movies, the protagonist uses a nuclear explosive device to try to fracture or divert the asteroid. And that makes sense in a movie because it's the most dramatic plot device you could employ. But actually, you probably wouldn't want to do that. And it actually might not even work. And it would definitely be illegal. There are treaties that specifically prohibit the use and deployment of a nuclear explosive device in outer space. And we could talk more about that if you want. But for now, just let's go slowly on the Bruce Willis. The second point is that we may have actually, in this panel, we may have been understating the danger of debris, because it's not just the deliberate creation of debris. As Pete mentioned, the most outrageous instances have been anti-satellite explosions, where you ram one spacecraft into another with the purpose of killing it. That kills it, but at the price of creating thousands of fragments of debris. But in addition to that, every space mission creates debris. It's inevitable. And there is no binding international law that regulates that. There are non-legally binding guidelines. There are industry best practices. There is hortatory expression of what companies and countries should do, but it's not yet legally operational. And the phenomenon that people are most worried about is what's sometimes called the Kessler phenomenon, named after a NASA astronaut, Donald Kessler. And there the concern is that if there's a collision between two spacecraft, operational or not, they ram into each other and fragment, and each of those fragments goes off in its own direction, and each of them might hit another satellite and cause it to fragment and create a chain reaction that could render large areas of space effectively unusable. And depending on the altitude of the collision, it could be unusable for decades to come. This problem, many people believe that we are now at the point where the population of debris and non-maneuverable satellites in especially popular orbits has already reached the point where the Kessler phenomenon might be unavoidable. It's a classic example of the tragedy of the commons, where humanity has fouled its own nest by not paying enough attention to sustainability in the use of outer space. I'll leave it there.
Well, I appreciate all these comments, and I do want to bore down on a lot of these regulatory issues and maybe the policies driving them. But I think it might be useful if we back up a bit and think about what are the governance mechanisms internationally for space, and how are they being interpreted by different states in terms of what they're actually doing in creating their policies and the regulation. Because I do think it varies quite a bit between the spacefaring states and all the others that have a stake in this and in humanity's future. But I'm going to violate what I just said, because I do want to share that. One of my previous bosses, Jim Armour, after he left government, went to go work for Orbital Sciences Corporation, and he was head of the what's called the Mission Extension Vehicle. So that was the first satellite that hooked up to another satellite to refuel it. And he used to go around and brag. Anyone know how long it took to get that licensed? He bragged about this. It took 7 years to be licensed. So the point that Amber's making is certainly a very good one. I mean, we need to do a better job of streamlining these regulations, maybe one-stop shop for that in the future. But
again, let's back up, guys. What's the big picture on this? What are we trying to do in space? And I think, David, you have the best insights.
So maybe I should begin with a little background briefing on the international law of outer space. This is a 3-credit course. You're going to get it in about 3 minutes. And the starting point is the observation, somewhat surprising, that there is such a thing as the law of outer space. Many people find that surprising. And in fact, many of my colleagues at Georgetown Law, when they see me talking about outer space, I can tell that their eyes are glazing over and they're instantly thinking about R2-D2 and Captain Kirk, and they don't even accept the proposition that there is law in outer space, but there is. And in fact, when I teach international law at Georgetown, I sometimes use outer space as a sparkling example of how sometimes, not often, but sometimes, when the international community first confronts a new resource or a new opportunity or a new danger, sometimes it can create new international law quickly and effectively. And space is an example of that. The foundational treaty on outer space, cleverly called the Outer Space Treaty, was created in 1967. That was only 10 years after Sputnik christened the space age. And within another 10 years after that, the world had negotiated and signed and brought into force 3 other treaties that provide more of the institutional infrastructure for safe and effective international operations in outer space. To have that degree of lawmaking within only a couple of decades is really rapid pace for international law, which ordinarily develops at a glacial rate. When you think about how long it took to develop the law of the sea, centuries, the law of airspace, decades. To do that within only 20 years is quite remarkable. But the process ground to a halt after that. After about 1980, the world has not developed additional treaties that would fill in more of the necessary legal material for safe and effective international operation. And that failure is particularly dramatic. The 1967 treaty, the full name is that it's the Treaty on Principles Governing the Activities of States in the Exploration and Use of Outer Space. The Treaty on Principles. It was designed to be a short, concise document that operated at a high level of abstraction and generality, and that would be fleshed out later on by additional lawmaking to fill in more of the gaps. And that filling in process began with these 3 additional treaties. But after that, the process became, let's call it, constipated. And the world has not generated new treaties. And that leaves us with a situation where the original treaties, in my view at least, are not wrong, they're not obsolete, they're just insufficient. We just don't have enough density of law to provide the structure for the safe and effective international operations. So that's a little bit of a quick orientation. There will not be a final exam for this course.
Maybe, Michael, would you tell us from a business perspective, investment perspective, what do you see as the biggest gaps in the governance regime? What would you like to see to kind of flesh that out and provide a more stable, predictable environment for investments?
Sure. So practically everybody is involved in outer space sitting in this audience. If you have a GPS receiver on your cell phone, you are a space traveler, so to speak. GPS, I'm going to give you, this is an example of how you make money on space. The GPS satellite program was contemplated and conceived in the 1960s. And it was the early 70s that launched the first GPS satellites. They were called Navstar at the time, but it's a long and very interesting history about GPS. I'm going to just try to annotate it a bit to say that the U.S. military and the U.S. Congress funded GPS, And yet, and that costs tens of billions of dollars. And they continue to launch satellites. I think there are 31 operational satellites even today. That system produced about $7 trillion worth of business opportunity on Earth. This had to do with GPS manufacturers, but also the automotive companies. The aviation industry is very dependent on GPS for the safe flight and operation of commercial aircraft, general aviation aircraft. Special GPS-related systems have been installed. We've invested in a number of these programs over the years. I used to run a GPS program when I was a young engineer back in the 80s. So that $7 trillion figure should ring, a different perspective in terms of where the opportunities are in space. They're not necessarily all having to do with launch vehicles. And there are new capabilities that are coming in. SpaceX's Starlink program, the Blue Origin program, satellite communications, although it has its contributions and problems to the issues that we've talked about, do create investment opportunities on Earth. And it's very exciting. The example I gave earlier about the company that wants to grind up the space station and keep the pellets up in space so that they can be, manufactured, you can manufacture other things. There's some wonderful, very powerful, creative ideas that are coming out of our innovators, our mostly young people that know enough about tech and know enough about life to create new and very interesting investment opportunities. We're looking for them all the time. We see a lot. We participate in a few. And this is the optimism of space that at least the investment community looks toward. But we need more and better regulations. As the private sector, you might think I'd be saying, let's have less regulations. Absolutely not. In space, it's a shared asset, and we have got to get our arms around the risk elements of this in order for this wonderful opportunity. We won't get to Mars if we don't fix some of these problems. Do we want to go to Mars? I don't care. I hope so. I mean, I watch Bruce Willis all the time. But there are so many different ways to prosper from space. And the GPS program is just a great example because it touches everybody.
And just to add on to that, Michael, I'm going to do a quick plug for Aerospace, Center for Space Policy and Strategy. We have a bunch of public free papers, and one of them covers the history of GPS and goes into some discussions about why it's so important, as well as the value of space. And it goes over, a different paper goes over just how much we use space every single day. GPS is a great example of a government program that has led to a lot of commercial innovation. There's a lot of examples of this in space too. Weather satellites, we have weather satellites through NOAA, and that doesn't stop us also from having commercial offers doing additional work, like Planet, taking pictures of the Earth so that we can get better information. So there's a lot of ways that space actually contributes to commercial innovation. And then going back to the discussion on space law, I think it's really interesting how the OST is still, the Outer Space Treaty is still the single most important document governing space. And I think it's truly remarkable that we've tested anti-satellite weapons, but we haven't done a kinetic attack in space. Now, that's not to say that isn't being, those boundaries of the OST aren't being pushed. In spring 2024, it was made public that Russia had a potential nuclear detonation-capable device on orbit, and that definitely pushes the bounds of the OST. And then the follow-up to that, where the US and I believe Japan proposed a reaffirmation to the OST, that was not voted on by Russia and China as well. So it's complicated to see the OST being pushed, but I also want to end on that hopeful bit where we haven't seen a massive violation of it yet. So hopefully it stays that way.
I just wanted to follow up on a couple of those things, and I can't escape the Grinch here, but if a nuke goes off in low Earth orbit, it will destroy all the satellites in low Earth orbit because it charges up the naturally occurring Van Allen radiation belts. And the satellites, as they orbit through that, can't dissipate that extra energy, and they will fail in weeks to months. So that's bad. That's like a multi-trillion-dollar event when you think about all of the economic implications of what those satellites are doing for the world. Going back to GPS, I just wanted to mention, that was developed solely for the military, folks. It was designed to help us more accurately deliver a nuclear weapon. And in 1980, the Clinton administration decided that they were going to turn off what was called selective availability, which was the feature that only gave that most precise signal to the military that had special receivers and special codes. So that is a single act that really prompted this development of a multi-trillion-dollar industry worldwide, and I think it was a brilliant move, and I think there's many other things in the offing kind of like that in space. So I know we're kind of running a bit short on time, but I think one of the other major dynamics we see going forward is who's going to be in the lead? Will it be private actors or will it be government actors? Certainly we talked a bit about Elon Musk. He is very vocal about his vision for things. Is that the right way going forward, or is this kind of an inherently governmental function? How do you all see that?
I see it as an inherently government function. One, I think that no one owns space. The pursuit of answering the questions about the universe is for all of humanity to consume and to understand. I think that the government has a unique responsibility to protect the space environment and protect the people that go to space. And I think that companies and industries have a responsibility to make money, and those things are not always compatible. So I think for the foreseeable future, we will see industry be a critical partner with government in realizing these ambitions. This week, the NASA administrator announced NASA's plans to establish a moon base, NASA's plans to invest in nuclear electric propulsion and to do surface fission power on the moon, to maybe extend ISS and build out commercial space stations so it won't be grinded, but it also won't be deorbited. But all to say, it's the government's vision being driven by American taxpayers to do this work. And I don't think that should change, because I think there is a level of altruism and inspiration that at least drove me into the space industry that I think we lose if we put industry at the forefront, particularly because industry actors have very specific goals. They change a lot, and they're not responsible to societies in those same ways. So I think the question is not if nations will lead. I think nations will lead. The question is which nations will lead. And right now we can take for granted that NASA, the most recognizable brand, the most successful space agency in the world, will stay on that trajectory. But it's not a foregone conclusion if we don't get the policy right. If we keep having these sharp pivots where one day we're heavily invested in deep space exploration, and then the next day all we care about is the surface of the moon. We've got to be able to have continuity and sustained plans. And look, space is more political now than it's ever been. And so one person's dreams of having humans on Mars can do a lot to inspire, but no one country, no one company, no one billionaire is going to make any of this a reality. So I hope and I think that government will continue to lead, but government will not be successful without industry.
I'm sorry, I just need to be a bit of a devil's advocate, because one of the things that I found shocking about Musk is he's launched more satellites than the rest of the world combined for several years now. He's a dominant actor. He is doing things much more cheaply and quickly than any government ever has. So I would like to find a way to harness that. I mean, the challenge is, of course, all the things that you brought up in terms of, you know, what is his overall agenda? Does it align with that of elected officials and the policies made by our government?
And look, intentions may or may not matter depending on, you know, sometimes the ends justify the means, and this is a good example with Starlink. So I talked about the TRACS program, where there's a government-owned and operated system that's available to everybody so we can see what's going on in space. Because of how much of Starlink is already in LEO that already come with star trackers, SpaceX can, for fun, in their free time, provide this type of data to the world. Because they're already collecting it. It literally is them aggregating the data in a special way and then providing it to the public. So there's so many benefits and so much innovation that does come when you have unlimited resources and a bold vision. And I think that matters, and I think Elon will have made such huge advances for humanity in space, regardless of what you think about his politics, and I value his role in that way. But again, he still can't do it alone, and he still can't do it without the support of government. Most of SpaceX's money is still coming from the U.S. government. So just thinking about, you know, how do we make sure industry does what industry can do, which is innovate, move quickly, move fast, and support the government. When it goes beyond that, I think we get in dangerous territory.
I feel a need to inject a dose of law on this point. Under the Outer Space Treaty, Article 6 has an unusual provision that requires that a country is responsible legally for the space activities of its nationals, its people, its corporations. That's an unusual provision. It doesn't apply anyplace else in international law, where in general, a country is not accountable for what its people or corporations do. If you are harmed in some international setting, if you are mugged while you are in London, or if you have a contract breached by somebody in Paris, or if you are defrauded by somebody in Tokyo, you have a cause of action against the particular person or corporation that did something to you, but the country, the United Kingdom or France or Japan, the country is not responsible for the things that its people or corporations do. That's the general rule. Space, however, has the opposite rule. In space, a country is accountable for what its private actors do in space, and that means that if Starlink has a satellite that crashes into one of your satellites, or if a Starlink satellite crashes onto your territory on Earth or smashes into your property on Earth, you have a cause of action against Elon Musk. You also have a cause of action against Uncle Sam. The country is responsible for the things in space that its private actors do.
I love that point. Yeah. I also think that it's important to think about, like, astronomy would not necessarily happen without government support. I'm just going to go back to the James Webb Space Telescope example. That was a multi-country $10 billion investment. And tell Elon, if you're listening, please fund the next big space telescope. That would be incredible. But it's not something that makes money directly, but touches all of us, I think, to our core, because it's part of the human nature to want to discover and to want to learn more about our universe. And the effects of that go beyond just inspiration, because the people that see those images might end up being the next Elon Musk, right? They might be the person building it. So I think one trend that is interesting is letting commercial innovate and provide solutions without necessarily the government dictating what those solutions are. That is definitely a trend in the space industry. It's a trend in the DoD, Department of Defense, trying not to do the acronym soup that space people really love. But yeah, that is a way that I see a lot of innovation happening.
Yeah, it's the difference between DoD saying, hey, we want you to build us this thing, versus DoD saying, hey, here's a problem we're trying to solve. Industry, tell us how we can.
Innovation is the lifeblood of our national defense as well. And we are in a competition for survival against those players out there. I could refer to China and Russia and maybe several others who are making massive investments in innovative technologies and capabilities that enhance their military capabilities. We're focused in the U.S. on dual-use technologies like GPS. If you think about the dependency that the world has already on space systems, it's incredible. GPS is a great example because if we lose GPS, we also lose our telecommunications networks because GPS provides timing signals to our global telecommunications, landlines, fiber optic, et cetera. And if you think about satellite launch capability, think about Ukraine and how dependent they are on both GPS and on Starlink to get there to survive, basically. So it has ramifications that we often don't think about, but that are vital to our day-to-day lives and to the economies that produce jobs and capabilities for our people. Space is going to produce trillions of dollars worth of economic benefit, provided the singular asset of space is properly managed. And we all hold our breath, wondering whether something nefarious is going to happen that will begin to wreck that, whether it's a sunspot or a nuclear explosion in near Earth, what have you. From an investment standpoint, however, we have a very frothy and very active investment community. I can probably speak for most of our, there are about 10,000 venture funds in the United States. And I would say at least a third of them are invested in space, either directly or indirectly, right now. That will grow. That will continue, provided we protect the asset that we share with everybody else on Earth. And we need good, improved policies and more, sustainability programs, et cetera, to make sure that we benefit as societies can benefit everywhere. You can make money at this stuff, and you can also further humanity.
Well, thanks very much for that. We're nearing the point where we need to open this up to questions, but before we do, I would like to ask another unfair question, which is, if you were king or queen of the world, what single thing would you advocate? What single thing do you think is most important to ensure we get past some of these impediments and realize some of these great opportunities? So I know that's unfair, but you guys are the big brains and have been working this for a while.
Well, let me begin my response with a commercial message. Over the past 2 or 3 years, I've been working on a project that has finally come to fruition, and that is a book that is the manual about, it's called the Rumor Manual on the international law of military activities in outer space. And the reason I wanted to highlight that is that we probably haven't done enough tonight to talk about the national security aspects of outer space and the dangers of an arms race and armed conflict in outer space. And again, for context, I think it's worth noting that for many people, historically, outer space has been thought of as something of a sanctuary, something that could be protected, removed from at least the worst forms of human competition, especially military competition. And other people would say that that image of outer space as a sanctuary is just a romantic muddle, that outer space is a place, like every other place, land, sea, or air, that has known military competition, has known armed races, and may know armed conflict. And to me, that's the choice point that we're at now, is whether we can do something as an international community effective to retard the dangers of militarization, weaponization, use of military activities in outer space. It's not an easy lift. It's not something that will happen automatically, but that does seem to me to be the real challenge now, is to try to find some way of retarding the incipient arms race, the danger of an armed conflict in outer space.
I really like that answer, and I like that, Pete, you brought up the unilateral commitment to the U.S. not performing any more ASAT tests. The way we talk about space is so important. I think it is possible to both hold the truth that space is more contested than ever before, and we have to be realistic about the dangers that face U.S. assets in space and everyone's assets in space from the potential of space warfare. But we can be realistic about that and prepare for that eventuality, while also doing the best we can to question assumptions, see where we can, work with adversaries when possible. Yes, I'm saying it. There's potential to find common ground, and not forget about international relations more broadly. Everyone has a stake in space, and I think there's a case to be made that people will listen in the international community on it.
Let me just talk a moment about an area that we're quite active in right now, which is the drone space and the operation of drones at below 5,000 feet in the United States and everywhere else in the world. A lot of these drones are inexpensive. You can pick them up at Costco. Many are equipped with GPS and even SATCOM. And so with the Iranian crisis, or the war, whatever you want to call it, we as people in aviation and aerospace, we're very concerned about a nefarious actor using a drone to send a bomb into a chemical factory or blow up an airplane with people in it. I mean, there are a lot of risks here, and I think one of the responsibilities of our government is to take steps, urgent steps, so that we can at least surveil where all of these drones are. This means putting micro radar systems throughout the United States, mostly in urban areas, but not just urban areas. This is a multi-billion-dollar investment in our futures, and it's essential that this be looked at efficiently. Our worry is that someone's going to do something in the next few weeks, and all of a sudden we finally have a program to fix the problem. We have electric aircraft coming into play shortly over the next couple of years. We're quite invested in that sector. The concern is that drones are already running into commercial airplanes because we don't know where they are, what they're doing, this sort of thing. And this is where technology comes together with policy, with military programs, and with civil programs, and with investment. These are problems that can be solved. There are opportunities to invest our capital to, of course, we like to make a return, but also to solve some of the most systemic risk problems on Earth that are related to space.
I think I'll dovetail off of that. I have two responses to the question, but the serious response is, for me, my hope is that we actually have what we need terrestrially to actually realize our space ambitions. We have a really serious supply chain issue in the space industry right now with all of, the Starlinks and the Amazon Leos and the launch vehicles. These are exquisite machines that require components and parts derived from critical minerals and things that are hard to source. When you're having, geopolitical disruptions around the world, it makes it even harder. And so, shameless plug, AIA just released a study with PwC last week unpacking the big choke points and bottlenecks for the space supply chain that's going to prevent any of our companies from scaling and growing, especially as NASA is talking about infrastructure on the moon. That material, those components have to come from somewhere. And so if we can't produce enough valves for the launch systems, if we can't get enough reaction wheels for satellites, if we don't have enough circuit boards for ground stations, no company's going to really be able to scale. And so when it comes to investments, it's about the people with the money being committed to the long-term vision, but also being willing to supercharge the industrial base where it needs to be. If we are seeing that I hear this story about a particular part that was needed for launch vehicles, and it was literally like a mom and pop shop. It got caught on fire, and it halted DoD production of this particular product because we had a single source for it. So that's a real national security risk if we can't produce, manufacture, and scale quickly and sustainably. And it also creates just huge opportunities for companies that are medium and small size to grow. Companies like SpaceX, which are vertically integrated, or even companies like Rocket Lab. I just heard today that Rocket Lab is a New Zealand-based company, but they have a U.S. Arm as well. They were having a hard time finding reaction wheels. So they just bought the small two companies that were creating them, and now they're fully vertically integrated, and now they're in the reaction wheel business. So all to say that all of these businesses have dependencies, and one of the things that the government can do in addition to removing regulatory barriers is take, this administration wants to see, I think, $50 or $70 million in foreign investment into the U.S. space industry. We can tell them where that money actually needs to go, and it needs to go into making sure that we can source the supply chain properly. So that's my first answer. The second one, if I'm queen, that means we're in a fantasy world. So I can be as speculative as I want. The reason I came into the space industry is because I do feel like space has a powerful ability to unify. And if there were a world where if we were having challenges on Earth, we could put, Macron and Trump in a space balloon, send them to the Kármán line and ask them if boundaries and borders really matter. That we can have a greater appreciation for Earth, because the conditions for us to be here as humans having this conversation is so unlikely for Earth to even be living and breathing and close enough to the sun, but not further enough that we can exist. There's a deep appreciation for Earth that I have developed being in the space industry that I want every American, every person on Earth to kind of at least internalize it, because I think it would do so much in terms of how we think about societies, how we think about cooperation, how we think about protecting the Earth from the inevitable impacts of climate change. Nobody has said the word climate change in like 2 years. And that scares me, because the planet that we need to be examining most is the one that we live on. And so I think for me, it's about using space as the great inspirer, but particularly when it comes to leadership and vision, us using space to remember what we're here to do in the 100 years that we all get as individuals, if we're lucky. And so if I'm queen, I'm sending every president of every country together in a space balloon so that they can talk about their silly little problems while, experiencing the overview effect.
Thanks very much. That's a great vision. I'll just share, I've had the privilege of teaching space policy since the 1980s, and I always come back to those themes. Space inspires like nothing else does. It's interdisciplinary, as few other things are in academia, and it truly is. It is inherently about humanity's future. So we have to get these things right, and I'm really glad we're having the opportunity to talk about that. And I think we've taken up much of your time, and I'm sure there might be some questions from the audience, or perhaps people online have some questions.
Hello, I'm Carl Headley from the Baltimore Sun. I've heard you talk a lot about the interactions between governments and commercial and industry organizations. How well do you think the average person on the street is getting these messages, or understands how GPS affects them?
So there's a public perception issue problem, call it what you want, and education is the way out. We are also, I think, sort of unaware of the threat of some of our adversaries with respect to space technologies and general military industrial issues. China is, of course, a country we have to watch very closely. China is run by the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, not by the president or prime minister. And they are whipping us badly with respect to their ability to invest in critical technology areas that are going to be at the forefront of national defense 20 years from now. Of 69 critical technology areas that are being tracked by policymakers and others, 60 of those 69 are now led by China. They're making bigger investments, deeper investments, and of the 9 technology areas that we seem to have a good handle on, they include things like quantum computing, et cetera. We're probably going to lose some of those in the next few years because the investments that are being made by the Chinese government that flow directly through industry and benefit the military industrial complex there are becoming increasing threats. So on that point, the Department of Defense is begging the private sector and the investment community to help overcome this problem. They've put in place certain policies. The Office of Strategic Capital is a good example of that, but it will probably take another few years of focusing policies to encourage the private sector. We have several $1 trillion of money sitting on the sidelines looking for good opportunities to invest in, and I'm hoping that a number of those are going to be dual-use areas that not only benefit us as consumers and investors, but also benefit our national priorities, national defense, our space programs, et cetera.
About 3 years ago, I'm a member of the Baltimore Science Fiction Society, and there was an international science fiction meeting in D.C., which NASA sent a group of scientists to, whose job is to protect this world. And they went through, and this world is pretty safe from what's outside coming in. It's what's a problem inside that we need to worry about. The experiment that you mentioned about hitting an asteroid with a rocket was done by this organization in NASA, and they found that it was very effective at preventing it from hitting the world. So that's not the problem. If you remember, and you quoted that the dinosaurs were destroyed by asteroids coming here, how long ago?
Do you have a question? Yeah. Okay, please get to the question.
How long has it been since the dinosaurs became extinct? We need to worry about what man does to this earth, not what asteroids are going to do.
Thank you.
Yeah, first of all, no slight to Bruce Willis, but I just saw the movie Gravity with Sandra Bullock about the space debris. It's pretty impressive. So anybody should to be aware of that. Contrary to what Amber said about government being the leader, when we first saw Elon Musk land the booster on a barge and then to be reusable, that's the economies. That was done by the private industry. Does space debris ever come down? I'm not sure about the because of the microgravity and all that sort of stuff. And finally, the topic here was originally global tourism. Nobody even mentioned that. And I was wondering, when the first person dies and gets stranded out in space, is that going to stop global tourism?
The debris one?
And can I take the launch one?
You got it. So yes, debris does come down, and it's actually the way that we dispose of a lot of the satellites in low Earth orbit right now. That is how we clean up space, is usually deorbiting objects. Sometimes it happens naturally, sometimes people leave extra fuel. Small pieces, yes, those also deorbit naturally. Sometimes it can take 10s, 20s, hundreds of years, depending on how high up in Earth orbit altitude-wise it is. And then with geostationary objects that are the furthest out in Earth orbit, those actually usually get pulled to a higher disposal orbit. So they'll leave enough fuel at the end of their life to get to send it up to a higher orbit. So in theory, those would take a very, very long time to deorbit. But yeah, the Earth's atmosphere acts as kind of like a natural trash cleaner, but I will say, this is an active area of study of what all those deorbiting satellites are actually going to be doing to our upper atmosphere, because it's going to be adding a lot of metals, heavy metals, things that aren't naturally in our upper atmosphere. So stay tuned to what the increasing traffic will do to our atmosphere.
Yeah, and on the launch point, so a rocket is going to space with things on it. It's a ride. So yes, SpaceX is absolutely responsible for Falcon 9 and Starship, but it's the payloads and the things that they're transporting to space is what actually makes the money. And those, by and large, are payloads from DoD, payloads from NASA. SpaceX will tell you that they are largely successful because of their partnership with NASA. NASA has bought those launch services from them. So they absolutely do the hardware, they do the designs for their own rockets, they own and operate their own rockets. But without a customer to ride on the rockets, there's nowhere to go and no reason to go. So think of it as like a ride share or a car. Yeah, you can manufacture cars all day, but if you don't have people in them that need to go places, people aren't going to buy the cars. Does that help?
Can I add one thing briefly about the debris problem? As you said, the longevity of the debris depends in large part on how high up the damage occurs. But a crude analogy is, imagine, if you will, that all the bullets that were shot during World War II, that they didn't come down, they didn't hit the ground. They kept whizzing around the battlefield, they kept whizzing around Europe for decades thereafter. That's sort of what happens in outer space. The debris that's created will remain there for years or decades, posing a near permanent hazard to all human activity thereafter.
Okay, I'm a student here, but I really want to ask a question about deploying nuclear reactors on lunar surface. So since I think after NASA release they will deploy a nuclear reactor, they said they will have a safe zone on Moon as political prevention for like the safety of nuclear, but that will cause like a new space race about deploying nuclear reactor. I think Roscosmos also declared they will partner with China to deploy their nuclear reactor. What is some US government's policy to prevent this happen, or should we just petition not to deploy nuclear reactors on the Moon? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good question. We have mechanisms in place to have dialogue around these behaviors, right? So the best way I can answer your question is and I think the professor should probably also weigh in on this. When it comes to governance and how companies and countries will behave on the Moon, there is a group of countries that have already come together under the Artemis Accords to have these conversations. I will say Russia and China are not at the table for these conversations. That said, the ILRS, which is the International Lunar Research Service, is a similar effort, very different from the Accords, but a similar effort to also bring countries to the table to have these conversations about how do you protect, how do you provide these safety zones on the Moon? And it really is important, particularly because all countries aren't going to get there at the same time and at the same rate to do the same things. And if we really are saying that we believe no one owns space, no one owns the moon, then we have to be earnest in our principles and how we govern who goes, where they go, and why they go. So I think whether it's mining on the moon or whether it's surface power or nuclear power, everybody has to understand the rules before they go. They have to understand how those rules will be enforced once they're there. And they have to understand the consequences of violating those rules, not just the legal consequences, but the physical harm and danger that they'll be putting themselves and others in if they behave badly on the surface of the moon. So there's a lot of incentives for countries to come together and get this right, because the competition to me is supposed to drive us to move faster, better, more efficient, and more safely, not so that we all get there just to create more conflict on the moon. So dialogue to me is one of the tools that the U.S. has. The Artemis Accords, I think, has been relatively successful. It's a new body, but it brings every country to the table, whether they have a space agency or not, whether they have architecture or plans to even be on the moon. They still get an opportunity to weigh in and say, hey, we think this could be harmful, or we care about astronomy and we don't want to, we want to do cislunar astronomy when we get there. All to say, all of those concerns are being raised now. They need to be raised now, because even I think Russia and China would acknowledge that bad behavior in these spaces will essentially just make space untenable for anyone.
I would say that the problem is even worse than that. That so much of what happens in outer space is just not subject to binding international law. That's what I meant when I said earlier that the problem is we don't have the density of legal infrastructure necessary to ensure harmonious operations in outer space. So when it comes to putting nuclear reactors on the moon, or when it comes to regulating space tourism, it's mostly that every country can make whatever rules it wants that govern its people and its corporations. And if somebody else doesn't like what you're doing, tough luck. There's just not an agreed upon international regulation of those activities.
Hi, I'm Nina Sovic. I'm a secondary science teacher. This has been fantastic. Thank you very much. I'm going to have all my students watch it when it comes out on YouTube. But I just wanted to ask you a question going back to debris. Have we established any data on how much debris space can actually hold before it would end up affecting our ability for satellites and other technologies to actually function beyond possibly just obscuring our ability to see things in space? And if we don't establish that, but we're going to take the perspective of government has a role in this, but we also want to encourage private industry to continue, like SpaceX and other people with enough financial means to send things up into space, couldn't that become an issue, since you had mentioned that every mission into space will leave some sort of debris behind?
I think it goes back to what you're talking about earlier with the Kessler syndrome and when it's going to become untenable to actually function and use satellites in space. But I think you have kind of two parts to your question. I'd say there's the debris issue, which I think you addressed very well. But then there's also the when can we get to the point where we actually can't see out? And I would say that we're at the point where most pictures from ground-based observatories, which have to spend long time doing long exposures of the night sky, we're at the point where we're seeing satellites in many of those. And so it really has become a question of what right do we have as humans to be able to see the night sky? And as much as I love space-based observations and observatories, it does not replace ground-based astronomy. So I think you're asking a very good question that we don't have a regulatory answer to right now. And I will say a lot of commercial actors have taken it upon themselves to do as much as they possibly can to reduce the impact by putting caps on how reflective their satellites can be, that sort of thing. So keeping it below visual magnitude so we can't actually see the satellites passing over us in certain circumstances because certain actors have placed their own self-restrictions on that, but there's not binding guidelines that they have to do that. It's just a goodwill of the industry. But yes, when it comes to the bigger debris problem, people realize that they need to prevent debris in order to continue functioning in space, but when it comes to the visual aspect, it's still a big open question.
Let me ask David a question, if that's...
Can I just add one thing on debris? If you point your students to the NASA Orbital Debris Office at the Johnson Space Flight Center, they have a lot of things publicly available. They do a monthly track of all the data, of all the debris, etc. One of the things that they've said is that if the U.S. just took out its own 5 largest pieces of debris, we will never get to the Kessler syndrome. So we're not doing that yet, so we've got to get going on it. But one of the key variables in debris is how much mass is the object. Because if a very large thing fractionates, it's going to create so much more debris. The other big issue is the smaller debris that can still cause damage is extremely difficult to track. So I don't want to suggest there aren't big problems, but I think that's a great resource, and they at least have a path to avoiding cascading effects of debris.
My question for David is the Law of the Sea treaty, which was finalized maybe 20 years ago, took 50 years to accommodate 100 and X countries. What is the timeline to produce, better treaties and frameworks for space as we sit here today?
Ordinarily, as a professor, I ask the questions. I don't have to answer the questions. But I will note that you're just right, the Law of the Sea Convention is a marvelous accomplishment. It is a constitution for the oceans that addresses just about all the important human activity on, under, and above the oceans. And it's been joined by almost every country around the world except for us. The United States has not joined the Law of the Sea Convention. And that serves as a good predictor of what might happen in outer space. It might take decades, and we might eventually be able to come up with rules that would accommodate almost everyone. But you can't be very optimistic that you can truly get a comprehensive code that will deal with all the issues in a manner that is satisfactory to everyone. Let me just say one additional thing about the debris problem. Here's an illustration of the problem of debris that I find very evocative. When the United States operated the space shuttle, the space plane that went into space and re-entered the atmosphere and landed back on Earth, the windows on the space shuttle occasionally had to be replaced because they get scuffed or scratched or marred by collisions with natural elements, micrometeorites, or with debris. And sometimes, when they analyzed the windows, they could determine that some of the scuff marks, some of the scratches, were caused by a collision with a fleck of dried paint that had come off some other spacecraft. Something that tiny and that light, traveling at the enormous orbital speeds, can scratch the windows that were designed to withstand the pressures of re-entering the atmosphere. If something that tiny and that light can have that impact, imagine what a baseball-sized object would do to almost any spacecraft.
I just have one question, and I just want to thank you guys for being here tonight. It's been a great panel. My question is, could there be a problem with deciding which country gets to launch a rocket to stop an impending asteroid to knock it out of orbit towards Earth? Could politics come in a way of a timely manner, getting it out of the way?
I'll begin my answer by a reference to a movie that you may remember. not Bruce Willis, Humphrey Bogart, the treasure of the Sierra Madre, where the miners are out in the hills of Mexico and they are accosted by bandits who want to steal their gold. And the bandits begin by saying, no, we're not bandits. We're police, we're federales. And Humphrey Bogart hollers back, if you're the army, show me your badges. And the bandits say, badges? We don't need no stinking badges. And that's the system of international law. That you don't need an international authority to be able to launch a spacecraft for the purpose of intersecting an asteroid or any other space mission. The general rule of state sovereignty is you don't need permission. You can do whatever you want to do, and there is no need for international authority or international cooperation. On the other hand, if you proceed in a way that does not have international authority, you may wind up running afoul of international law. So that if your mission to destroy an asteroid relies upon a nuclear explosion, you're violating treaties, and you may be subject to the penalties for violating those treaties. So the short answer is, you don't need no stinking permission. You can do whatever you want.
Hello, I'm a student here. Thank you so much for coming to Goucher. I had more of an open-ended question. What is the favorite or the most interesting paper or piece of writing that you've worked on or that you've read recently about, well, your work or your research?
I'll say I wrote and submitted a paper to the IAF about how we get more space lawyers and policymakers in the workforce pipeline. I think there has been a lot of work over the last 10 years to really talk about STEM and the value of engineering and space sciences. But in this environment where space is growing so fast and countries are coming up with new space laws every day and new ways to regulate, and companies are not asking how do they get insured for their space missions. There's just a lot of business and policy of space that we need smart, trained people who have gone through, these school systems and these programs that have the U.S. at least ready to go to the UN and to have these global conversations about law and governance. So I wrote this paper selfishly because I'm a policy person that came into the space industry and really wanted to know where I could add value and where my skills would be, where I would be able to contribute intellectually in a room full of rocket scientists, and really understanding that the rocket scientists have no idea about how congressional budgets work, or they don't understand what it means when an agency isn't working together on regulations and policy. So I'm a huge champion for getting more students in the space law and policy programs, and that's what I wrote about recently.
I love this question. I try to ask this of everyone I talk to as well, so thank you for it. Of the things I've written, I'm really excited about my AI in space paper because it goes over, what are the use cases of AI in space right now? What does the future potentially look like? I have some other things in the works, but that's the most recent one. And I tell everyone right now to go read Weapons in Space by Aaron Bateman, also because I think it's super relevant to some current events, as well as it lays out the history of how a lot of these treaties came about and how they apply to what's some proposed missions today. Weapons in Space by Aaron Bateman.
And let me go back. I have a recommendation. It's not just rocket science. It's by Kelly Girardi. She is a private astronaut that has gone to space. I think she was maybe the 40th woman to go to space. But she does a really good job of making space policy digestible and understandable for just the layperson. And she just happens to be a very cool chick. So Kelly Girardi is not just rocket scientist.
For me, the answer is easy. It's the Woomer Manual on the International Law of Military Space Activities, because it's your comprehensive guide. to everything you'd want to know about military activities in space during peacetime, during times of crisis, and during times of armed conflict. And as a special feature, I'm sort of contemplating the idea of making this into a movie. And of course, the casting is a big deal. So if any of you want to try out for the role of an asteroid, just let us know.
If this is a plug for our businesses, if you go to a website called uamgo.com, you'll find a white paper that we published just this week extolling the importance of building national infrastructure that will track errant drones, and we have capital to pursue this. The white paper gives the whole background. It identifies the strategic reasons for doing all this to protect the homeland, so to speak. And hopefully we'll see our light bulbs flashing when people jump on the website and grab that white paper. Thank you.
So I'll pay you later for that question. I really love Aaron Bateman's book. He's a colleague of mine at George Washington University. He's an absolutely brilliant guy. But if you want to go a bit further back, there's a book called The Heavens and the Earth by Walter McDougall, and that won the Pulitzer Prize for History in 1986. So, in my opinion, that's the single best book about space. It really explains what happened at the beginning of the space race. You didn't ask specifically, but in these things, people always talk about what's the best science fiction. The best science fiction is The Expanse. If you haven't seen that, you should watch it. It's fantastic. What paper did I just write that I like? I wrote one called On the Precipice, Artificial Intelligence and Nuclear Command and Control and Communications. So that's not specifically just about space, but it's, AI is the most consequential technology that humans have developed. Nuclear weapons obviously pose all kinds of existential risks. So wouldn't it be a great idea to put those two things together? I don't think so.
All right, so Peter, we have just one quick final question.
Thank you. My name is Samantha. I'm also a student here. I didn't know this lecture was happening, but I'm so glad I passed by. I was really curious on how do you see the field of international space law evolving? Because last week I was reading this article about how to avoid the colonization, exploitation of celestial bodies, and we were reading how maybe giving personhood and judicial standing to celestial bodies could be a possibility. Do you see that could ever be possible, and how do you see the field evolving right now?
So there is an evolution, and I think it's fair to say that more and more people and more institutions are paying attention to this mechanism for regulating the final frontier. And they better be, because it's tremendously important. There's a lot of money to be made there. There's a lot of dangers evolving there. And the world should be responding to that. So I do think that this is a growing field, and it's one where we could use more help. So chip in.
I want to say thank you. Incredible panel. This was more than 3 credits for this night. I think everybody got incredible education with the debris and the GPS. I can't thank you enough for coming and opening up our minds in this stellar world. I want to thank everybody who joined us here in person and also online. Our great talk, we have all different topics all the time. This one, Space Invaders, was really very eye-opening. Thank you for coming. I just want to give a plug. These events are all free, so if you enjoy them, you could always visit us at greattalk.org to help us out. And you could also, you will find out information. This will be posted online at some point in our future events. So thank you so much for coming and joining us, and I wish you all a good night. Thank you.